Hello, kids, and welcome to the first episode in a series where I will tell you the story of Western philosophy. It all started 13.8 billion years ago when God was like, bang. Earth, water, primordial soup. A couple billion years later, some adventurous fish decides to go on land, and it all goes downhill from there. Evolution, dinosaurs, asteroid, boom. No more dinosaurs, but somehow our common ancestor, the shrew, survives. All of a sudden, sapiens emerge from Africa. We grow progressively bigger brains, tribes become organized agrarian communities become great civilizations, and one of these great civilizations goes on to capture the Western imagination unlike any other. Ancient Greece is born. Their rise is filled with all sorts of core Western advancements: democratia, trade with low transaction costs, the Olympics, tragic plays, and much more. But most important to us, philosophy. In the words of Bertrand Russell, philosophy begins with Thales. For ages before Thales, the narrative reality and objective reality were combined into one enchanted world. Hesiod and Homer were the chief sources of truth. The sun soared across the cosmos because Helios rode his chariot. Thunder shook the earth because Zeus was having girl problems. But one day a single man disrupted it all with a single question, and his name was Thales. That very first question that reverberated across the cosmos was the question, what is stuff? And what was our brilliant father of philosophy's response? Thales theorized that everything was water. Water was the primal origin and womb of all things. To this, Nietzsche replies, is it really necessary for us to take serious notice of this proposition? It is, and for three reasons. First, because it tells us something about the primal origin of all things. Second, because it does so in a language devoid of image or fable. And finally, because contained in it, if only embryonically, is the thought, all things are one. The first reason still leaves Thales in the company of the religious and superstitious. The second takes him out of such company and shows him as a natural scientist. But the third makes him the first Greek philosopher. You may be wondering, how is something as absurd as the claim everything is made of water scientific? Well, perhaps he observed that all living things required water to survive, or that where water wasn't, the land was barren, or that water was the most overabundant substance he saw, covering 70% of the Earth's surface, or that water was one of the only things he likely ever observed in a solid, liquid, or gas state, or that blood, sweat, and tears are all accompanied by liquid, or any other myriad of reasons we could come up with to justify his rationale, but the reasoning isn't what's important. The supposed shift from mythos to logos is what the mainstream philosophic community praises him for. Nietzsche, however, sees more than just this shift. He says, what drove him to it was a metaphysical conviction which had its origin in a mystic intuition. And just as for the dramatist words and verse are but the stammering of an alien tongue needed to tell what he has seen and lived, what he could utter directly only through music or gesture, just so every profound philosophic intuition expressed through dialectical and through scientific reflection is only a means for the philosopher to communicate what he has seen. But it's a sad means, basically a metaphoric and entirely unfaithful translation into a totally different sphere in speech. Thus Thales had seen the unity of all that is, but when he went to communicate it, he found himself talking about water. To convey this simply, I will define some basic terms. Being and becoming. Becoming is that which is coming into existence, or going out of existence, that which changes throughout time. Being is the arché, the fundamental unchanging basis of reality. For Thales, this being, this arché, is water. Thales, like many early Greek philosophers, is mythologized a bit. He has many fascinating stories, like the time he set out to do what many students with philosophy degrees fail to do today, prove to the world that his studies weren't a waste of time and resources. He set out to prove that he could make money through philosophy by predicting that there would be an incredibly abundant olive harvest based on the weather. He bought up all the olive presses, and with the aid of unethical monopolization tactics, he then leased them out as the demand increased. Truly a capitalist ahead of his time and a hero to us all. As for the cosmos, he didn't stop with the assertion that all things were water, no. He looked up to the heavens and gained even more renown by predicting an eclipse. He hung out with the Babylonians and Egyptians, who had been doing this casually for a while now, then returned to Greece and utilizing their discoveries both in astrology and mathematics. He gets credit for being the first recorded individual to both predict an eclipse and make a mathematical discovery. He used deductive geometric reasoning to calculate the heights of the pyramids and the distance of ships from the shore. He was said to believe that the earth floats on water like a log, and that magnets have souls, both highly debated to this day. Thales even spent time in politics, but we won't get into that. Perhaps Thales' most important accomplishment was that he founded a school, where he taught some of our next great philosophers, so the philosophic tradition continued on. His first important student was named Anaximander. Anaximander basically said to Thales, hey there, Bucko, if everything stems from the moist, then how is it that we have the dry? Boom. Anaximander destroys Thales. Nietzsche says, while the archetype of the philosopher emerges with the image of Thales only out of shifting mists, the image of his great successor already speaks much more plainly to Unlike us. Thales' assertion that the fundamental basis of everything is water, Anaximander's basis for the cosmos, his being, his arché, is Apeiron, the boundless, the unlimited, the infinite, an idea whose precise meaning is hotly debated. But in my estimation, it is most simply the idea that the universe originates in the separation of opposites in the primordial matter, and that being, arché, must then be that which has no opposite, that which is without bounds, boundless. Perhaps more accurately than saying it means infinite, we should say it's something like contourless. He states, where the source of things is, to that place they must also pass away, according to necessity, for they must pay penance and be judged for their injustices in accordance with the ordinance of time. Upon which Nietzsche comments, it may not be logical, but it certainly is human to view now, together with Anaximander, all becoming as though it were an illegitimate emancipation from the eternal being, a wrong for which destruction is the only penance. Everything that has ever come to be, again, passes away, whether we think of human life, or of water, or of hot and cold. Wherever definite qualities are perceivable, we can prophesy upon the basis of enormously extensive experience, the passing away of these qualities. Never, in other words, can a being that possesses definite qualities or consists of such be the origin or first principle of things. That which truly is, concludes Anaximander, cannot possess definite characteristics, or it would come to be and pass away, like all other things. In order that coming to be shall not cease, primal being must be indefinite. The immortality and everlastingness of primal being does not lie in its infinitude or its inexhaustibility, as the commentators of Anaximander generally assume, but in the fact that it is devoid of definite qualities that would lead to its passing. Hence the name, the indefinite. We must direct our glance to the sentence which we cited earlier, to the place where we may learn that Anaximander was no longer dealing with the question of the origin of this world in a purely physical way. Rather, when he saw the multiplicity of things that have come to be, a sum of injustices that must be expiated, he grasped with bold fingers the tangle of the profoundest problem in ethics. He was the first Greek to do so. How can anything pass away which has the right to be? Anaximander represents a shift from empirical reasoning to rational reasoning. He was a genius for his time and for ours, but more importantly, he was a fellow flat earther. He believed that the inhabited portion of the earth was flat, the top face of a puck-like cylinder. This puck floats, supported by nothing, remaining in place because it is equidistant from all other things, so it has no reason to fly off in any one direction. He believes that the sun and the moon are hollow rings filled with fire. Their disks are vents and holes in the rings through which the fire can shine. The phases of the moon, as well as the eclipse of the sun and moon, are due to the vents closing up. However, the earth wasn't the only floating puck out there. In his mind, there was a plurality of worlds. Censorinus writes, Anaximander of Miletus considered that from warmed-up water and earth emerged either fish or entirely fish-like animals. Inside these animals, men took form, and embryos were held prisoner until puberty. Only then, after these animals burst open, could men and women come out, now able to feed themselves. Reading this brought me great relief, knowing that I was not the only one trapped in a fish until puberty. From this, many credit Anaximander with conceiving of a primitive form of evolution. Fish came from some primordial soup of earth and water. Anaximander succeeded Thales and became the second master of the Milesian school, teaching a man who was once a fellow student of Thales, Anaximenes. Anaximenes was the last of the monistic Milesians. If we interviewed him, it would go a little like this. So Anaximenes, Thales brought the world out of mythology and conceived of monism, both monumental accomplishments. Anaximander elevated philosophy to an even higher level of abstraction with his brilliant rationality, an incredible advancement. The progress of philosophy is moving at a staggering pace, so what do you think the arché is? What being is? What is your great contribution? Air. I think it's air. At first, Anaximenes can feel like the disappointing child that gets included for participating, but let's hear him out. He said, air differs in essence in accordance with its rarity or density. When it is thinned, it becomes fire, while when it is condensed, it becomes wind, then cloud, and still more condensed, it becomes water, then earth, then stones. Everything else comes from these, and the earth is flat, created by felted air, and it floats like a leaf floating on air. Why would Anaximenes think that air would condense and become cold, or thin and become hot? Well, when you blow air onto your hands with your mouth wide open, it's warm, but when you blow with half-closed lips, it's cool. The realization that things change with condensation and rarefaction is an impressive one, but in some ways Anaximenes can feel like a regression from Thales and Anaximander. However, I only joke when I insinuate that. He's essential to include in our story because he represents the completion of a dialectical triad, a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In other words, Thales claimed that everything was made of one definable thing, water, based on empirical observations. Water is the arché. Anaximander claims that the arché is boundless and undefinable, based on rational thought. Anaximenes combines the two with the claim that the arché is air, a substance definable but simultaneously divine and boundless according to the Greek imagination. Cicero writes, Anaximenes said that air is God and that it is boundless and infinite and always in motion. Air had divine attributes to the Greeks, and thus Anaximenes is the middle ground between Thales and Anaximander. Through this dialectic form of evolving ideas, we get a view into what makes Greek philosophy so enthralling, its conversational nature. As this series goes on and more characters are added to the conversation, you'll gradually feel more and more like you're not just listening to the stories of dead men, but that you're participating in a conversation that lives on. Philosophers thousands of years later will reference back to the pre-Socratics. The question, what is the arché, will continue to be answered. According to the very highly respected and trusted historian Diogenes Laertius, Anaximenes wrote to Pythagoras in a letter, Thales, son of Examius, has met an unfortunate end in old age. He left his house at night, as was his habit, with his serving woman to view the stars, and forgetting where he was, as he gazed, he stepped over the edge of a steep slope and fell. Thus the astronomer of Miletus met his end. And with that, our chapter reaches its end. Join me next time to explore the life of the third and most famous of Thales' students, Pythagoras, the cult leader who feared beans above all else and became the most influential philosopher of all time.